Welcome to the Brave Table, Nisa. The tables have turned.
Ooh, the tables have turned. So it was so exciting because we were thinking about all right, we're doing a planning session and you're like, all right, let's let the cameras roll. Cause I feel like so many times people don't necessarily they think that it takes just showing up.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to give credit to you because you've been my manager, my director, and producer, really, of the entire show. And just looking back, I feel like on episode 20 something now.
Yeah.
And it just started as, I feel like, a dream that we were just talking about it. And now it's been amazing that we're fully in. So now the tables have turned. I feel like I'm in the hot seat.
I have to thank you for trusting me with your voice and literally you amplifying your words and your thoughts out to the world and letting me, massage it. And even everything from finding the music to the show and how this is going to differentiate from other similar shows. Mm-hmm. And, I don't take that lightly. It's been a real pleasure working with different entrepreneurs who trust me so much with their digital self, their online persona, how they communicate to people. Mm. And it's a really, it's a really beautiful, magical thing.
Yeah. And I the reason why I was like, all right, we gotta do this. And have you come on is because most people think it's just, we just turn on the camera or turn on the mic, which some people actually do. They do it all by themselves, and kudos and mad props and everything. Yeah. And I just felt like we wanted to do it a little bit differently where, I do wear a lot of hats, and I do literally and figuratively, there's a hat right here. But I felt like we needed to have a team in place to make sure that there's audio running, that the essence of the show was really going to be birthed out. So thanks for that.
Yeah, it's funny. I think for me, when I was younger, I definitely had more of a starving artist mentality as a creative, which is you just do cool things and people are going to find it. But the reality is it takes a lot of work to amplify it, to get it to people's ears, to get it to people on social media apps. There has to be a strategy. There has to be planning. There has to be intentionality. And I think people see and feel the care. Mm. You know what I mean? They can't even necessarily explicitly name why they like what they like, whether that's their favorite TV show or their favorite podcast. It's just when someone puts intention and really love into anything, people can feel it.
And it's going to grow.
And I hope people feel that with this show because we put a lot of love and care and time into it.
We do.
So now that we've recorded a couple, I was curious, what do you think you have learned either from your guests or even just this process of expressing yourself in this medium?
Yeah. So, wow. I mean, as we were kind of looking back on all of the guests that we have had and all of the conversations we've had, when I set out to call the show The Brave Table, it was very much I'm literally peeking my edge because I grew up as kind of this perfectionist, everything has to go a certain way and this way. And I think that's why that even the name, The Brave Table, would suggest, okay, you got to get brave. You have to walk your talk. Yeah. And we've had some people on the show that have really challenged me in that of okay, yeah, you're saying this is the Brave Table, bring it to the Brave Table. Yeah. And it's almost am I going to share that? Am I really going to go there? And so for me, it's really being present to, it is the true namesake, walking the talk of there may be some things that I might not agree with what a guest's saying, but to really honor them, respect them, and support them in that way, because they do have a point of view to share. Also, even when, certain guests are asking me questions, it's almost like, and it's in conversation, because this is interview style, but it's also totally conversation. Like, I want to make sure you're like able to connect and be part of the conversation that we're having, as well as kind of like an interview style, and also maybe like a little bit of learning and teaching in that way. But it's also made me say, okay, if I am bringing these guests to the table, I've got to be brave and go there myself.
Yeah.
And so really learning to continue to expand and stretch in the places where I may not be as comfortable as I thought, which has been really cool to see.
Yeah, well, and I hope our listeners are inspired to be brave in their own little small ways. And for me, I think some of the bravest moments for me have been having to have difficult conversations with people.
Ooh.
And usually it's not as scary as it is when you just like take the plunge.
Yeah.
It's been like, I want to develop a closer relationship with my sister, or I want to talk to my mom and dad about something from my childhood that's just been like buried and unaddressed. And then, I think we almost default to what is easy.
Yep.
Right. And then we have to have that intentionality to be like, right, in certain relationships, maybe these topics are okay to talk about.
Right.
But then it's like, it's a two-way street. We could be like, you know what, actually, this thing is bothering me and I want to bring it up.
Mm-hmm. Because the other idea is like, it's going to rock the boat, so I won't.
Yeah.
But I feel like more and more of the audience is like writing in, even in reviews, saying, you know what, this has helped me actually have that conversation with somebody that I thought wronged me. But in fact, it was just like a misunderstanding that we needed to just clear the air. So to even be brave, to open yourself up to potentially like even some criticism, or even maybe some backlash, or even some being misunderstood, to either be okay with it or to even be brave and say, hey, I kind of want to clear the air because I care about you.
Well, even speaking of opening yourself up, even before this podcast, you have been so public facing for a really long time with your books, with social media. What was it like in the beginning, early stages of you deciding to like build your personal brand, as opposed to like working more with people behind the scenes, coaching and consulting behind the scenes, versus being like, I'm out here, this is what I'm thinking, making videos, doing pictures, I think that's really challenging for a lot of people, but also there's a lot of benefits in just like taking the plunge and being a little vulnerable.
So it's interesting that you ask that, because yes, I mean, I was kind of very public when I was making transitions from dentistry to coaching to basically all of the things that I was doing in my voyage of researching for my books, where I definitely shared a lot of it online. And yes, it definitely did come with the pros and the cons, because people who knew me in a certain lens, let's just say my old life before I got divorced, or even honestly, a lot of the scrutiny came from some of my close family members, to the point where some of my bad, like, I don't know, comments, my troll comments were coming from people I actually either grew up with or knew, or, it's like another cousin or second cousin or a third cousin, like people who didn't appreciate your evolution.
Because they have a fixed image of you in their mind.
1,000%.
You're frozen at the point in which they like last interacted with you, or in which
was like, 20 years old or whatever.
I'm not gonna stop growing from that person I was.
Yeah. And it was, in the beginning, it was like some of the comments I actually remember, it was like, oh, wow. Like something like, oh, your dad wouldn't be proud of you, or something like that. And I knew it was like a particular either cousin or an aunt or something that just had this fixed view. And I was like, oh, wow, that's kind of hurtful, because I'm like, man, I'm thinking in my head, my dad's like championing me on, and like his spirit's just like fueling this. And so I think for those of you who are so afraid of what other people will think, yes, it's a true fear. And I want to acknowledge it because absolutely, I had to work through those, and you might get some backlash. I'm not going to say you won't, because we all will experience that. And it is part and parcel of being brave and being vulnerable and being seen. The idea of being seen by other people and the idea that you may not resonate with everybody. Some people may be listening to this and they might just get turned off because they're like, oh, how could you, disrespect your elders or family members or whatever? Like, I've heard it all. And for those of you kind of in that transition right now of like, should I do this? I don't know. Am I going to disrespect people? Especially coming from like cultures of immigrant parents and families where they're like, oh, I don't approve of this. I only know you as a doctor. Like, I still have family members who are asking, do you still practice? And I'm like,
so you're going to go back, right? Like, all this stuff is fun, but
right,
so
yeah.
when are you going to get back?
Right. Aren't you going to see patients again? And I'm like, wait, what? Huh? You don't get it. And you know what? Bless them, because they may never get it.
Yeah.
They're actually operating in their own system of life and their own truth that is truthful to them. It might not be your truth, but it's truthful to them. And I think there's a way that we can respect it and honor it without taking it for ourselves and still honoring our truth. And I think that's what keeps me going every single day. Even if I see a bad comment or something like that, I remember the one or two people right now, all of you who are tuning in, subscribing, listening every week, who are like, yes, I needed to hear this. Like, maybe you are that black sheep or brown sheep of your family. Maybe you are the person that's kind of like, I want to do this, but ooh, am I going to like burn some bridges because of that? And I want to encourage you to like, peek into that, see into that. What is it that you are afraid of? What is it that you are trying to avoid? Because we have to think about the people who are hurt by this. They're hurt because perhaps maybe you're triggering something in them that they could never, ever realize for themselves. If you think about our immigrant families, they came here to have a better life. So a lot of it was fueled by struggle, fueled by what they were leaving behind. A lot of times they were leaving behind the only homes they knew in countries that they had to leave, right? So their friends, family members, and then they come here. And a lot of times it was that struggle, right, to get to the American dream. And here we are living our best lives, saying, nope, we don't want to do medicine. We don't want to do law. We don't want to be an engineer or a nurse. And they couldn't even get that opportunity. So how privileged are we that I could even have this conversation, that I could even say, yeah, I'm not going to subscribe to that. And I want to give you permission to do the same. And while some of those comments were hurtful in the past, now I look at it like, you know what? It's actually fueling thousands of other really amazing, positive people who are like, man, you really transformed me. And gosh, because of that, I took my first step into saying this or having that conversation with my mom or disagreeing openly. And my dad was actually okay with it, right? So the little steps in the moments that we are brave, I think, is one of the things that I'm just so grateful for that we can bring on, yes, in the limelight of being a public persona, right?
Yeah. I mean, we can't blame the elders for wanting us to go after safe money, like a safe.
Totally. Everything's safe.
That's coming from a place of love, when you really put yourself in their perspective. And
also many times that they couldn't go into the things that they wanted to go into.
Yeah. And the world has changed a bit. I'm glad to be in 2022 here. But, kind of race and representation has come up a couple of times on the show, in a couple of our different interviews, like with Vasavi and just different people. And one of the things I think I've picked up is that seeing people like yourself represented is really important to you. Mm-hmm. Like whether it's the entrepreneur space, investor, in the world of spirituality, there are certain circles in which they're not always super diverse, right?
No.
So why is it important to you to be, I think, just like a brown woman in this space? And what are you hoping to maybe inspire out of others.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Thank you for asking that. And we've talked about this a lot. Like, who do we want to bring on to talk about these conversations? And I think growing up, I still remember it was either was like my 6th grade or 7th grade, but there was or maybe it was 8th grade. It was Mr. Jones. So shout out to whoever went to Disney Magnet School with me and probably remember what we actually did, or whoever was my class. We actually had this it was this project that we had to do where we had to recreate like a show. And I remember the only person that I knew that was doing it that I was like, oh, I could totally embody was Oprah.
Yeah.
Because she was totally a Chicago figure.
Right.
And she was totally she was brown.
Yeah.
And she had this like amazing, nurturing energy and had fun with the audience, but also made them cry and also made them laugh. And then you also had like Jerry Springer. Shout out to those of you who grew up in the 90s.
Who makes me think of my 6 days at home.
Right? Where it was like those people were like on the couches and they were like jumping up and down. I feel like I'm dating myself a little bit. But
no, everyone knows what we're talking about. Jerry Springer.
Right? And so I remember with Mr. Jones, he's like, okay, you're gonna, like, we had to reenact a scene. And I remember getting like these old chairs together. And if you went to like a public school, basically they had those like old, the upholstery is like all kind of like 80s or 70s style. It was like blue and maybe like a yellow. And I remember pulling it together and we had a whole class of like 30 kids. And I remember I was going up there and I was pretending I was Oprah because that was the whole project. And I had 3 of my friends who were my guests who were also in my class. And I don't know what it was for, but pretending that I was interviewing them as, I don't know, a 6th or 7th grader. I don't remember how old I was, but that gave me so much, I felt so liberated. And it was like so different than what my parents, who are immigrant, my dad's from India, my mom's from the Philippines, immigrant parents what they wanted for me, which was medicine and nursing and engineering. Yeah. And I remember in that moment, I'm like, okay, I'm stepping into Oprah right now.
Yeah.
Interviewing these friends. And it was literally like, I don't know, it was a 10-minute skit, but it felt so incredible at that moment because I was like, oh, wow, I can actually interview people? Yeah. That's kind of cool. Yeah. And now fast forward, we have so many other brown creators whom I love, like shout out to Lily Singh, who honestly I've been following for a number of years, who I feel like has paved the way for so many brown creators, and also Liza Koshy as well. But I think it's so great to see that representation. And we're seeing it more and more, obviously, on the screen, the big screen, all of the screens, and in our, kind of like in our feeds. One of my co-founders, Sahara, she does this super well for her audience. But I think it liberates us who are born of immigrant parents. And I see this because I get some of your DMs all the time. I get some of your YouTube comments all the time around, oh man, like, thank you so much for doing this because I wish I learned that growing up. I didn't get to have that conversation growing up with my parents, or I'm struggling with this right now. How do I have the conversation that I thought I really liked medicine because my cousins and my friends and my family friends were going into it, but I don't really like it. Is it okay to shift? Is it okay to change? The other question that I get is, do you regret doing what you did before doing what you do now? Actually, no, everything has all been perfect and divine and incredible and amazing. I wouldn't be the person who I am without all the stories and all the elements if I didn't go through that. But I think it gives people so much more comfort that if I can do it, you can do it too in that way. And I know it sounds a little bit of a cliche, but I feel like, oh wow, now we get to see and we can actually embody that and we can expand that vision for ourselves of what it could look like. Because growing up, I didn't really get to see that as much.
Yeah.
The only person was literally, it was Oprah.
It was like, you count them on one hand. One
it was one person. And now you're like, oh, wow. It's so amazing when I see, people, whether it's mainstream or even just online, that's like really living their truth and their voice in their unique expression that they would, which I think is so endearing and so empowering.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I've kind of wondered if you felt like there were years of your life that were lost in which you were trying to finding yourself to get to where you are now. And you're saying like, no, it's interesting how there are chapters in our lives and we never know where it's all leading.
Yep.
But just to embrace that, it's all going to work out. There's a certain level of faith,
Totally.
And as you can probably guess, we were just talking about Conan. I was definitely a kid who was like watching shows like that and imagining like someday I'm going to be on that chair or I'm going to be the one asking the questions. But then I didn't see a lot of representation. Mm-hmm. And so when you see someone like Hassan Minhaj leading his show, doing his stand-up, all of those, I'm like, cool, skinny brown guy. I'm like a skinny brown guy. Like it is so important to see yourself reflected,
Absolutely.
And it's so interesting how a lot of this comes down to like bravery of challenging ourselves to think about what we're truly capable of. You were saying like people have an idea of themselves and there's almost like a limit to it, like a glass ceiling, and you have to break through that and then look around and say, maybe there's some other options too. I did want to ask you about just kind of advice for people who are maybe wanting to get started with creating content, putting their voice out there, or maybe even just finding a new direction in that next chapter. How do you even start the process of challenging your assumptions to maybe make a pivot or to try something new?
Ooh, yes. So I think it starts out with you have to really know yourself. And in the beginning, I struggled with this a lot because I struggled with, thoughts of imposter syndrome. Like, oh my gosh, who am I to write this book? After I sold my dental business, I went on this voyage and it was really this big spiritual journey. I was traveling a bunch, literally everywhere. I was also doing my own self-healing journey, meeting with different shamans, meeting with different healers of all different types, traditional and non-traditional, Western and Eastern, all around the world. But really it was all to get to know myself better because I wasn't really given that permission growing up of like, oh, who are you? It was mostly like, who am I in relation to satisfying other people's happiness?
There's this saying I like, people say it's like research is really doing me search.
I know, it's so good.
Like dabbling in this and that, but it's like, it's really about trying to figure out who we are.
Oh, I love that so much. It's so true. It's so true. And that me search was really a lot of knowing what you like and what you don't like, knowing what your non-negotiables are, knowing what are some of the topics that you are so convicted about speaking about. What are you so passionate about talking about? What are you willing to get on a soapbox for? And what are you also willing to be scrutinized for? Right? So in that discovery, you get to know, okay, I'm comfortable talking about X. I'm actually not comfortable talking about Y, or I don't really have any opinions on Z. And all of those things are all okay, right? And I think that in the very beginning, I felt like, okay, I came from this like medical background, so I had to have all the facts. Everything was about facts. And it was not really about like what my actual opinions were about a subject. And I realized that, oh wait, I do have opinions about this that is not found in any sort of textbook. Like you can't quote everybody under the sun about it. Like they are probably informed by people that you've researched, that you resonate with, that you admire. But coming from this like medicalized background, that was my first like explosion into, oh shit, I have my own opinions and it's because of the intersectionality of my upbringing, what I'm currently interested in now, what I'm currently letting go, and what I'm also discovering about myself. And for somebody who is just getting started, I would love for you to just take out a pen and paper. Maybe you have one right now, but write down all of the things that you are so excited about. What are some of the things that maybe annoy you? What are some of the things that make you so angry? Like when somebody cuts you off in traffic or when somebody's like super late, why does that bug you? And I remember this because one of my niche research things that I did was I took a stand-up comedy class.
Nice.
And I also took improv. I loved improv more than stand-up comedy, but I can appreciate the beauty of stand-up because these were some of the exercises that I was given. It was like, okay, what can you rant about for like 5 minutes that you wouldn't give a fuck about?
Yeah.
Right? And so for me, thinking about it was, oh my goodness, and for me, it was just like, I don't know, I said something about like how I hated when people had food stuck in between their teeth. Hello. Yeah. That was like the dentist in me, of course. But like when friends or people that that you're talking to would not ever tell you that something was stuck in your teeth. Like, why wouldn't you ever tell somebody about that? Right.
It's like a deep metaphor for that too, right? Like, we don't like to tell people they have something in their teeth because it's more uncomfortable for us to tell them. It's like, I feel like that translates to like all of life. It comes back to like difficult conversations. Right?
Difficult conversations, not making the person feel that
self-conscious.
They are self-conscious.
They get home like 2 hours later and they look in the mirror and they're like, oh, why didn't you tell me?
Like she was with me for like 3 hours. Why didn't she say anything? So like some of those kinds of topics, like think about that. Like I could probably talk about that for 10 minutes, but like what are some of the things that you could rant about? Because that, and make a list of all of those. Like for me, it was that. I mean, and another thing that I'm really like passionate about is chai. I always have been. And I can talk about like all the different varieties of chai that I was able to create from nothing when I was traveling to 60 plus countries around the world. So all of the little things that make you unique. And you might think, well, Neetha, I'm only 18 years old. I just graduated high school. I have nothing to share. Nothing bad has happened in my life. I've had a pretty decent life. Well, we've all had things that didn't go our way. What are some of the things that you failed? Did you fail a test? Did you fail a relationship? Did you get burnt by a friendship? We all have things. Doesn't matter how young you are or you're like, you know what, I've seen, or maybe how jaded you are, right? But there are definitely things that you could probably make a list of that you're like, yep, I can definitely talk about that. I'm so passionate about this. I'm so passionate about this. And just make a list. And you'll find in going back through that list, you'll say, oh, okay, there's a pattern here. I really love, let's just say health and wellness, or I really love politics, or I really love history, or I really love Europe, and then you'll see patterns in what are the topics and things that you really like talking about or you really want to rant and rave about. So absolutely.
I think that's great advice because so often it's like, I feel like we wake up and then live our whole day and then go to bed without even really reflecting on like, what am I passionate about? What do I want to learn more about? We're just like in go, go, go mode with our responsibilities and different things.
Well, totally. But I also wanted to say for those people who are like, well, I have to be an expert at something. And we get this a lot in one of the companies that I teach at Dharma Coaching Institute. We get this a lot where they're like, oh, I don't know enough. I have to be an expert in something. And you're like, well, actually, you're an expert in your life. You've lived through your life.
Yeah.
And maybe you've taken a couple of courses in yoga, body work, breath work, et cetera, that make you so unique, right? Well, you can add that in the mix and then add another flair in the mix and add another flavor of something in the mix, right? It's that whole alchemizing or concoction in that potion of the magic you elixir that exists that you can start sharing that makes you the expert of you.
I love that. I have to share a story with you about this hurdle people run into when they say, I'm not an expert. Just this whole imposter syndrome thing. So have you seen the movie Catch Me If You Can with Leonardo?
Oh God, I love it. I love him.
So the ultimate imposter,
Totally.
he becomes a fake doctor. He becomes a fake professor. He becomes a fake lawyer, right? Now, this is a true story written about Frank Abagnale, the real guy who actually then goes on in real life to work with the FBI fraud department. And so now he is kind of used his like powers of mischievousness to now be on the side of the law and prevent other fraudsters. And I was reading this book about the real Frank Abagnale, who the movie's based off of. And they said, you know, you've done all these crazy things, but I have to know, when you were like 17, 18 years old, how did you actually be a fake sociology professor? Because you didn't go to school for this. And he said, I just had to stay one chapter ahead of the students. Right. And so sometimes when you're just a little bit ahead of the people that you want to speak to, you're actually the best person to speak to that audience, because you're not 10 chapters ahead.
Right.
You're one chapter ahead. So you might actually be the perfect person to speak to them. So that story has always resonated with me, because I think we all tell ourselves that story of like, who am I? You know, I'm just so-and-so.
I'm just this person.
This, you know.
Right. No, and it's so true. And sometimes when you're 10 steps ahead, you forget what it took to get out of that relationship. You forget what it took to leave your corporate job. You forget what it took to start your company, you know, and it's always like, well, maybe you are speaking to that younger version of yourself that was like 5 years ago, who either was lost and confused or trying to find their way, or just at a crossroads of life. Maybe that's who you're speaking to.
Versus trying to speak to yourself from 20 years ago.
Yes.
Maybe a little more difficult. Like, you know, can you even really remember who you were back then?
Totally.
But, you know, I wanted to bring it back to something you were saying about beginning this spiritual journey of all of the different modalities and things you've sought. We've talked a lot about spirituality on the Brave Table podcast, about kind of where we're at in the moment. But, you know, I really was just curious. I wanted to ask you about the future of like where you see this all going. And maybe just because you have a better like ear to the pulse of what's happening in these spiritual communities. If you could bust out your crystal ball here, like
yes.
just within the next, I feel like we've seen a pretty massive increase in the acceptance of like spiritual practices. Everything from like yoga to meditation to things that are more esoteric, advanced. Where do you see this all going? Like what is on the horizon? What excites you within the world of spirituality right now?
Well, I'm so excited for this question. And, you know, it has been a journey, honestly. And I'm constantly relearning, unlearning, unraveling. And I feel like within spiritual practice, it's never like, you know, the next level on the rung, right? There are lessons that probably didn't speak to me 5 years ago in the way that it speaks to me now, because I'm in a different season of my life. Or there are things that I perhaps maybe took for granted that I was exposed to. Perhaps it was angels or, you know, card readings and things like that were part of my altar back then, 5 or 6 years ago. But now it's actually calling my name a little bit more. And I think that wherever you are in your spiritual practice, you're exactly where you need to be. Now, where we see this going, I think it's been so fascinating in the last few years, where we've had this pretty much this great reset of, you know, the times that we've been in, this great reckoning that we've all had to go inward. And all the conversations that we've been having, I mean, even friends that I was able to connect with that have just moved here, like from places like, you know, Canada, where it has completely been shut down for 2 years. One of my friends was just sharing that she was like, Neitha, I didn't realize that when I got to my yoga mat, because that was literally my church 7 days out of the week, and I got to my yoga mat here in Austin in person, because she had been doing this virtual thing for pretty much the last 2 years, because everything's been pretty much shut down over there for the last few years. And some of you will really appreciate this, that she said, I fell to my mat and I was sobbing. She's like, I was sobbing for like 10 minutes. And she's like, and I was always almost embarrassed of myself because I didn't know where this release was happening and coming from. It was just this overwhelming amount of emotion that took me over. She's like, because I had just realized that it had been 2 years that I had seen and practiced with other people. And literally that was my church. That was my spiritual practice. And it was so different doing it on a Zoom or virtual versus experiencing the energy of one in unity amongst everyone else. And it really touched me. And I felt that from her, because it was like, oh my God, yeah. In the last few years, we've recognized, and for those of us really like to really sit with some of those feelings of discomfort and also get to know, because we couldn't move as fast as we could. We couldn't go to all the places that we were used to going to. And the simple joys of our daily life, for some people, were completely stripped away and taken away, that we had to rediscover what that looked like for ourselves. So now going forward, people are like, yeah, I need community.
Yeah.
That's my spiritual practice.
There's an opportunity to reevaluate what matters.
1,000%. I mean, it's this opportunity not just for growth and expansion, but also opportunity to seek what you've always been searching for outside of yourself. Now, that's always been with you internally. And sometimes it's not doing yoga on a Zoom call. Sometimes it is being out in a community that's supporting and nurturing. Sometimes it is perhaps moving to a different state or a different city to find people that are more in alignment with your values. Or perhaps maybe it is sitting in conversations where people don't agree with you, and to sit in the stillness of that and what actually is coming up for you as a mirror or a practice to lean into. I think spirituality, where it's going down, in the future, is being able to wrestle with the different emotions of joy and grief, of play and painful, all at the same time.
Yeah, I feel like I sense people, it's kind of a buzzword right now. People are really shifting into shadow work as opposed to just more of the positive self. Everything is flowery and bubbly, and we're going to have our drum circle and just vibe all day. And that's great too, but we can have both.
We can have both.
We don't have to shove down emotions. We don't have to have any kind of toxic positivity. It's more integrated, holistic.
I think the integration, which is what has been coming up in the last few years, because the last few years brought up all of the, this anxious internal angst of what are we going to do? Oh my gosh, all the fears. But how to integrate what is coming up, meaning, okay, all of those fears and angst are coming up. I'm going to look at those fears. I'm going to look at the shadow side of what that means that's unresolved in my past, in my childhood, or even the fact that I cannot sit still. What does it mean to not be able to travel? Or what does it mean to not be able to go to my favorite yoga studio and then go there after 2 years in person and have a full out release and cry and really understand that I was actually grieving this the entire time and I didn't realize it. And that was the beauty of our conversation, because she's like, Neeta, I actually realized that I had a real big grief around not being able to go to my church in person and to redefine what that means, I think is so beautiful for us to have that awareness. And I think it's only going to grow bigger and bigger and bigger. And now that we're coming out on the other side of this, to really, truly, as you're mentioning, the buzzword is integration and shadow work. And shadow is really that mirror of ourselves. of why is that person irritating me, or why is that person triggering me again?
Maybe there's something I'm seeing in them that's a part of myself I don't like.
Yeah.
Maybe we're actually all just one. But yeah, I've heard people say COVID is like a psychedelic for the masses, right? And not to minimize the deaths and the pain that people have experienced, but like psychedelic experiences are sometimes very painful, but also very transformative.
1000%. Oh, yes.
So, okay, to switch gears a second for the ultimate turning of tables.
Oh, gosh.
Let's head into the igniting round.
You're so good at this. Shout out to Chris, right? Like, who would have known my behind the scenes manager and director and producer is like, you're a great interviewer. This is great.
Many hats. Thank you.
Yes, you
Thank
are.
you so much.
Awesome.
But you've asked so many people about what it means to be brave. And it's really the thesis of the show. Just today, I mean, right now, what does it mean to you to be brave?
Yes. So I think right now we're at this time where it's okay to be okay with not knowing all the answers. It's okay to be brave in saying, you know what? I changed my mind about an opinion, and not to be held in stone of who you were yesterday or the year before or 2 years ago or 5 years ago, that you can be a whole new person tomorrow, today, after this conversation, and being brave in the ownership of that and stepping into that. And also, I think what it means to be brave is to step into being completely unconventional and being okay to, I say this a lot on the show, but being okay to be misunderstood without even having to justify yourself. I think that's the ultimate bravery, because at the core of us being human beings, we all want to be liked. We all want to be loved. We have the greatest desire to belong. And what does it look like if we are not liked? Can we be brave in being okay with trolls, being okay with getting rejected, being okay within our truth that you are still enough and you are still whole and you are still for somebody?
So follow up, would you have been afraid to do a show like this 2 or 3 years ago that was this personal and vulnerable and putting all this out there into the world?
Oh yeah. Oh gosh, absolutely. Yes. I actually started a podcast like a couple of years, well, it was like 5 or 6 years ago, on the backings of my first book, Emotional Grit. And I was just curious about understanding more about leaders, because at the time we were going through a shift. It was in 2016. And I think the book that I was writing about was really about having compassion and what does it mean to have that compassionate leadership, and what does really emotional grit mean in that sense. I've now expanded it, of course, to everyday humans, not just leaders, because I feel like everyday humans in our work and everyday people, leaders of our own lives, we need it more than anyone else to really change the conversation. But absolutely, a few years ago, I was going through my own identity crisis, just becoming a mom and grieving the death of like me as a free bird woman, quote unquote, and having to redefine what that meant. And I felt like, oh gosh, do I want to talk about this? I don't even know. Is this the right time? Oh my goodness. Like, just so much internal talk, where now I feel like after having my second child, or my daughter, I feel like she's given me that like Shakti power, or that like goddess energy power of like, let it all hang out. Let it all be on the table. And she's honestly been giving me that brave energy to speak, to share.
Well, I'm proud of you for doing this show, for sharing so much of yourself. I mean, obviously, part of the reason I got into this whole world is because, like, I was a theater kid who loved movies, and that's why I got a film degree. And I love being around people that inspire me. And when I see others share parts of themselves that maybe are uncomfortable or unconventional, it gives me permission to do it too.
Oh,
so
love that.
I just love being part of the show for that reason. But on to the next question.
Go team. Go team.
Tell me about a magic moment of suck. A moment that sucked initially, but that be led to something great.
Yeah. Oh gosh. I have many moments that sucked. Many, many moments that really sucked.
One you haven't already covered on the show.
Oh, well, intuitively what's coming up is honestly my divorce. And that was such a powerful breakup. And I know we've probably gone over it maybe a little bit, but I can't talk about it enough. And the reason why is because that was such a great initiation. And I think relationships, for those of you who are in them or parting them or going through perhaps maybe a breakup of some sort in a friendship, in a relationship, in a boss and sort of that sort of relationship, or work environment relationship. I think relationships in general and the breakups of that, because people are so dynamic and integral to our lives, that they are really the greatest teachers. And for me, it was such a huge awakening that led me to my spiritual growth, as well as the journey back to myself and really loving myself at my core and accepting who I was. I mean, unleashing the perfectionism and everything that went along with it, from my career path changes to the things that I was so closed off to before, like psychedelics and alternative modes of healing and spirituality and the esoteric practices. Like, I was such a no for all of those things, in that marriage, and just fully, completely unleashing and unraveling on the other side of that. So give yourself grace if you are in that moment of suck where you're in this kind of crossroads of like, I don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. And you really don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. But the only thing that you can trust is yourself, and yourself in that moment, in the small moments, and the next moment that precedes that, and the next moment that follows that, and the next moment that follows that. And really follow the breadcrumbs along the way when you say yes, because that is really the magic in the suck.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that. I love that. Okay, on to our final question. What is one word you would use to describe the season of life right now? Or it could be a couple words.
Okay. Yes. I love that this is getting so reflected back on me. Okay. I would definitely say expansion. This has been the season of expansion in so many ways. Expanding myself when I feel like I want to curl up into a ball, when I feel like, ooh, is this going to be too much? When I feel like, do I know enough about that yet? Ooh, am I doing a good job? To really expand into honestly what I don't know, and to trust that it's all going to be okay regardless. So really trusting in the expansion and not being attached to the outcome.
All right. Well, here is to expansion. I hope we have many more episodes together. This is just the beginning of the Brave Table. So yes. Thank you for coming on the show. And
so amazing. So amazing. Chris, I mean, you guys, this is kind of like impromptu, and we were just talking about it. And then he's just like, why don't I just interview you? And I'm like, okay, let's see how it goes. So we totally want to hear what your thoughts are about this. But I just want to say, because we're filming in this incredible location in Westlake Hills, and for me to sit where the guest is sitting right now, I can see the flowers on the back of this wall. And from this angle, it definitely looks like a blossoming, an expansion, an opening, a ripening and almost like this rebirth of power and love and magic and joy. So I just want you all to sit in that as I am relishing in the artwork behind me that you probably will see on YouTube and even on Instagram when you watch. But just look at it, because it is just absolutely incredible that we get to do this together. So thanks, team.
There's something beautiful about you're in the new position being interviewed. I'm the producer who's now interviewing you.
I know. How does that feel?
There's something to be said for like putting yourself in other people's shoes, and hopefully people will be brave and figure out where they can see another perspective.
Absolutely. Well,
all right, Brave Table fam. Until next time.
See you next time at the Brave Table.